I'm Nahed Kabbani, and this is the Lighthouse for today's viewers. Welcome to our show. Palestinian-Israeli issue is and was the longest story maybe in history, still alive and still active heavily. And still no solution, because none of the solutions were having just for the other side of the story, which is the victim side of the story. It happened that this year marked a century of this story. 100 years ago, the story started with promise, just promise, and today we struggle with identity, and people get lost, and human being destroyed, and history places as Holy Land destroyed also. To know more about this topic and to understand the situation, to be able to think about helping with the solution maybe, let's watch this show together.
Welcome everyone. Thank you. My name is Delphine Brody, and I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace Sacramento, and I will be facilitating today's forum. I'd like to recognize that we are gathered here on stolen land. The native peoples of this land are the Plains Miwok and the Nisenan, the southern Maidu. This land is the site of over 2 centuries of land theft, occupation, colonial settlement, dispossession, and genocide. These injustices continue to the present day, and it is the collective responsibility of the settlers of this land to bring about decolonization, the repatriation of indigenous land and life through conscious processes that we work on together. I would like to thank the co-hosts of today's forum, the Global Center for Business Development at the University of the Pacific, McGeorge School of Law, and Jewish Voice for Peace Sacramento. And I'd like to bring up Professor Professor Omar, Professor Omar
Hi everyone, welcome. On behalf of the McGeorge School of Law, where I teach, and the Global Center, which my colleague Jared Wong and I co-direct, we want to welcome all of you here and also express our appreciation to Joel and Vesma, who will be introduced a little further later, and who've come all the way from Palo Alto for the occasion today, and David Mandel, who's done so much of the legwork organizing this event on behalf of Jewish Voice for Peace. We hope that you will continue to see McGeorge Law School as your law school in Sacramento. Our doors are open to the community, and the community is really important to us. So we look forward to what we hope will be a really rich afternoon of conversation. We welcome disagreement about all of the things that will be discussed today, but of course welcome that disagreement on the condition of civility. So look forward to a animated but civil conversation about a century of conflict that is of importance to all of us.
There are a couple seats up here.
Can we have a little time out?
There's some more seats up there.
Sure, absolutely.
A couple seats up here, John. And there's chairs out in the
Go ahead.
I'm going to bring in some chairs.
Thank you, Professor Omar Bajani. Today's forum marks 4 major anniversaries. The 1917 Balfour Declaration, 100 years ago. The 1947 UN Partition Plan, 70 years ago. The 1967 Six-Day War and Occupation, 50 years ago. And the 2007 blockade of Gaza, 10 years ago. George Santayana once said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. With presentations by our panelists following discussion, we will examine some of the lesser-known backgrounds and circumstances of these historical events, how they contributed to the ongoing denial of Palestinian self-determination, and the implications for current efforts to change direction. So here's a schedule for today. For part 1, which we're starting now, we'll have welcome and intros. The panelists will present on the 4 historical events I just named. So we'll allow 5 minutes for pressing clarifications and points of information from community members. This is small. And co-sponsors will have 5 minutes at the end of this session to make brief announcements about any upcoming events. Then we will take a break, and there will be refreshments and info tables outside. And part 2, the break will start at 2:30 p.m. and part 2 will begin at 3 o'clock and go until 4:30. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments from the community members and panelists responding to each other. How might we learn from the history to shape a just future will be the next topic that the panelists will address. And then community members will again have an opportunity for questions and comments. Finally, we will close at network. So I'd like to ask each of you to please make a generous donation to help cover the cost of presenters' travel, printing flyers, and food. And I would like to thank our co-sponsors. Democratic Socialists of America, Sacramento Move to Amend, Sacramento Area Peace Action, the Peace and Freedom Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the Wellstone Progressive Democratic Club, and the National Lawyers Guild, Sacramento. Please visit their tables during our break. So our first panelist that I'd like to introduce is Professor Joel Beynon of Stanford University. Joel Beynon is a Donald J. McLachlan Professor of History and Professor of Middle East History at Stanford University. His research and writing focus on the social and cultural history of political economy of modern Egypt, Palestine, and Israel, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and U.S. policy in the Middle East. He has written or edited 11 books, most recently Workers and Thieves, Labor Movements and Popular Uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt on Stanford University Press, 2016. He received his PhD from the University of Michigan in 1982 and has been teaching at Stanford since 1983. From 2006 to 2008, he served as Director of Middle East Studies and Professor of History at the American University in Cairo. In 2002, he served as President of the Middle East Studies Association of North America. He has been a member of Jewish Voice for Peace since 2000.
You probably can't read the Balfour Declaration. I can barely read it from here. The key phrases are His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, ellipsis, it being clearly understood that nothing should be done which would prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish population. Now there's been a ton of speculation and commemoration around this statement as the cornerstone of the establishment of the State of Israel. The Declaration actually means nothing. For example, it doesn't say where Palestine is. It doesn't say what a Jewish national home is, a Jewish national home. A national home is not a terminology that has any standing in international law. It doesn't note that the existing non-Jewish population are over 90% of the inhabitants of Palestine at the time that this statement was made. So it's pretty vacuous in terms of its actual content. What it does reflect is the presumption of Europeans and North Americans that they had the right and even the duty to colonize and rule what we would now call the global south, primarily Asia and Africa. In France, this was called the civilizing mission. In the United Kingdom, The White Man's Burden. That was actually a poem by Rudyard Kipling, which encouraged the United States to take up the imperialist burden in the Spanish-American War, although the United States had actually been doing that for since the founding of the country, the Mexican War of 1846, just for one example. So this is the country that we're actually talking about, Ottoman Greater Syria, Bilad al-Sham, it's called in Arabic. And if you'll note, you probably can't read, but there is no place called Palestine on this map. And Palestine hadn't been a political division of any empire or regime since the early Islamic period. The Ottoman Empire, which ruled Greater Syria, looked like this in the darker orange on the eve of World War I. And the lighter orange chunks were all chunks that were either occupied by European powers or where European powers encouraged independent movements of Christians. So the Balfour Declaration is, in one respect, not at all unique. It simply reflects what Europeans were doing at the time, dividing up and colonizing the world. The distinction of the Balfour Declaration is that this is just to show you that the United States is this sort of thing too. This is manifest destiny. The distinction of the Balfour Declaration was that it is not a single promise relating to a piece of land undefined, but one of three promises about that same piece of land. So in correspondence between the British agent in Cairo, Sir Henry McMahon, and Sharif Hussein, the former Ottoman governor of Mecca, in which Hussein and McMahon agree that the Arabs will revolt against the Ottoman Empire in exchange for British assistance. And Hussein asked for this area to be recognized as an independent Arab state with him as king. McMahon, sort of, in very vague terms, excluded that pink area, which isn't Palestine. It's actually Maronite Mount Lebanon, because McMahon made clear that Maronites are Christians, but they're still Arabs, and excluded them for that reason. Then, yet again, in a secret treaty between the French and the British, Mark Sykes on behalf of the British, Georges Picot on behalf of the French, the two powers decided that they would divide up Greater Syria, Ottoman Greater Syria, in this way. So dark blue, French direct rule; light blue, French indirect rule; dark red, British direct rule, that's where the oil is; light reds, indirect British rule, and the yellow is Palestine. But on this map, which is very detailed, this purple area is meant to be a joint Anglo-French condominiums with the British getting Haifa, which is strategically the most important part of the area. So Balfour for the Zionists, also Palestine, perhaps for the Sharifians who revolted against the Ottoman Empire, and then a total territorial divide up between the French and the British, not respecting either the promises to the Arabs or the future promises to the Zionists. Now, so how did this happen? Another distinctive part of the Balfour Declaration is that it was the result of very heavy Zionist lobbying in Britain to get the British government to allot to the Zionists, or to the Jewish people more broadly, an area in Palestine. So this is unusual, that British Jews are lobbying their government to give a piece of land somewhere else. And it's especially unusual because the great majority of British Jews were anti-Zionists. So Sir Edmund Montagu, who's top left there, was the Secretary of State for India, the only Jew in the cabinet who was vehemently against the Balfour Declaration and called it anti-Semitic because if Palestine was to be the national home for the Jewish people, then what about English Jews like himself? Then England wouldn't be their national home, or French Jews or any other Jews. Lucien Wolfe, who's in the middle, a very prominent Jewish journalist, and who was head of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, which is still the leading Jewish organization in Britain today. He was very adamantly anti-Zionist. And Claude Montefiore, who's on the cover of the book on the bottom right, also. So these are all quite powerful and important and very outspoken Jewish anti-Zionists. How is it then that this small group of Zionist Jews gathered around Chaim Weizmann, who was born in Russia, came to England in 1904, became a professor at Manchester University, and invented a process for synthesizing acetone, which is a key ingredient of cordite, which is necessary for smokeless explosives. So he, through this chemical activity, which became very important during World War I, gained entree to British governmental circles. He was also a brilliant diplomat. He met C.P. Snow, the editor of the Manchester Guardian, and through him was introduced to David Lloyd George, then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, future Prime Minister at the time of the issuance of the Balfour Declaration. He also met, of course, Balfour himself, and many other British officials who ultimately worked on the Balfour Declaration. So this group was not unanimous. Some were harder line than others, but Weizmann was incontrovertibly the leader of the group and ultimately defeated those other figures who I mentioned in the previous slide, people like Montagu, Montefiore, Wolfe, and became essentially the leader of British Jewry by sleight of hand, really, because the government ended up favoring their position rather than the anti-Zionist position of the others. Now, when, after much negotiation and lobbying, the British government decided, okay, we are going to issue some kind of a declaration. So the government went to Chaim Weizmann and said, give us a declaration and we'll issue it back to you. So what did the Zionists ask for? In July of 1917, some months before the actual declaration was issued on November 2nd, the Zionist group formulated the following. That's this, which you'll never read that. His Majesty's government accepts the principle that Palestine should be reconstituted as the national home of the Jewish people. His Majesty's government will use its best endeavors to secure the achievement of this object and will discuss the necessary methods and means with the Zionist organization. So what's the difference between the two formulations? In this formulation, it's clear what the Zionists want. Palestine, that is all of it, wherever it is, because it doesn't have any clear borders at this point, Palestine should be reconstituted. Reconstituted means once it was. So this is a claim for 2,000 years of continuous historical claim to Palestine, which was interrupted by diaspora and so on. Palestine should be reconstituted as the national home of the Jewish people. No mention here of any non-Jewish inhabitants. It's the same 93 or so % of Palestinian Arabs who are the vast majority of the inhabitants at this time. And in the second clause, the British government is supposed to deal with the World Zionist Organization in order to make this come about. In the actual Balfour Declaration, which is a letter to Walter Rothschild, a particularly wealthy British Jew, who was one of the few in that class who actually was pro-Zionist, although mildly so. The letter simply concludes by saying, I'd appreciate it if you bring this to the attention of the Zionist organization. In other words, there's no intention in the declaration to actually work with the Zionist organization to make whatever the British government thinks is going to happen, happen. So after World War I, the parties to the conflict gathered at Versailles, outside Paris, the peace conference, and of course, everybody who had received the promise came there to have the promise redeemed. So here is Faisal in the front, and in the back there is Lawrence of Arabia. And President Woodrow Wilson, who was at Versailles, had issued the 14 points as part of the American justification for ending the war. They include the statement that nationalities now under Turkish, that is Ottoman rule, should be assured security of life and absolutely unmolested opportunity of autonomous development. Now, Woodrow Wilson supported the Ku Klux Klan and was an awful racist. So he actually didn't mean this to apply to Arabs in the same way as he meant it to this terminology to apply to Europeans, but be that as it may, Faisal was there to get to redeem the promise that the British made to him. And of course, Weizmann is there to redeem the promise that the British made to him. And they meet, because there they realize, oh, we have a problem. The British have promised the same thing to the both of us. So this is the first time that the Zionists define Palestine. And here it is, including part of what's today Jordan and part of what's today the Sinai Peninsula. And Faisal is ready to say, okay, if the Arabs are established as I have asked in my manifesto of 4th January, addressed to the British Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, I will carry out what is written in this agreement. That is, the Zionists can have that part, that Palestine in those borders. If changes are made, I cannot be answerable for failing to carry out this agreement. And of course, Faisal did not get what the British had promised his family, and so the deal was off. The end of the day, Balfour, on the eve of his resignation as foreign minister, wrote a long memorandum, of which I'm only showing you a bit of the part that relates directly to Palestine, and it reads, in Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. The 4 great powers are committed to Zionism, and Zionism, be it right or wrong, good or bad, is rooted in age-long traditions, in present needs, in future hopes, of far profounder import than the desires and prejudices of the 700,000 Arabs who now inhabit that